Hello everyone, this is a lecture for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We are fast forwarding to the 14th and 15th centuries with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a 14th century work composed in Middle English. So, a few things to know about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is a chivalric romance, which is a very important genre of the time. If you think King Arthur and the Knights of Camelot, which this actually includes the Knights of Camelot, with Sir Gawain being a Knight of the Round Table. Um, these are chivalric romances, so they're still heroics. This is still a very heroic poem, similar to Beowulf, but the nature of the heroics has changed. Rather than a test of strength and a test of might against, a, physical evil, it's a test of character, of Christian character, in the face of snares and traps and temptations. So it's to test the virtue of the hero. So that's the primary test, and that's the primary test of Sir Gawain in Sir Gawain the Green Knight, is that he gets his his virtue is tested. In his mind, he fails, but considering the circumstances, it appears that he did well enough according to the code of chivalry and the Christian code of not sleeping with another man's wife, for instance. So there are some terms to know about this chivalric romance I already mentioned. Alliterative verse. You'll notice that alliteration is where you have the repetitions of sounds. So, like, for instance, if you look at some of the lines here, I'm turning randomly to 267. So expect no malice, for if I'd slog here tonight to slay and slaughter. So that S sound, slogged, slay, slaughter, that's alliteration within the verse, and that's the type of verse it's here. In fact, this poem is kind of says belonging to an alliterative revival, which actually goes back to Old English. Beowulf technically is an alliterative poem in the Old English, not in, but we have a modern translation, so you won't see it as much. Bob and wheel. That is characteristic of this poem. The rhyme scheme at the end that rounds off each stanza, you know, with a little rhyme. So, for instance, I'm turning to 275, line 275, page 191. Then Arthur answered, Knight, most courteous you claim, a fair unarmored fight, we'll see you have the same. So there's that A B rhyme scheme that closes, shorter verses that close off. That's a bob and wheel. That is particular to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So let's talk about the Pearl Poet, as this poet's known as. Again, we have an author that doesn't have an explicit name. In fact, it's one of the few, one of the few poems that survive, one of the few manuscripts that survives from this period, because of all the historical turmoil that goes on. So it begins with tracing the lineage of Britain to Rome, which does not necessarily seem historically accurate, but there is a lot of Roman influence in Britain at the time, especially with the roads being paved by Romans. But centuries before they had, in fact, what's interesting is that Aeneas, who's the hero of the Aeneid, is kind of portrayed as a traitorous villain during the Middle Ages, during this time. So, an interesting tradition, especially because now we know that's a mistake, and he was actually supposed to be seen as a hero. So it's Christmas at Camelot. This is a time of festivity. Everybody seems to be happy. In fact, even the young Arthur is happy enough. Well, he wants something a little bit more exciting. He seems a little bored, but all the men are getting kisses from women. People are feasting. There's jousts. It's it's a time of celebration. It's peacetime. And so there's carousing, there's revelry, there's these are these knights are described as chivalrous and courteous. So they use physical force when necessary to protect their kingdom, but they're also gentlemen. They observe, they talk, they use love language with ladies to court ladies. There's, this is a court culture of courtship, that you become, gentle and mild in the presence of ladies, for instance, and that dynamic is maintained. Chivalry is basically just a code of behavior for knights, as far as how to behave virtuously and nobly. That nobility isn't just birth, allegedly, supposedly, but it's also supposed to be about character. And then it's on page 189 that we have the Green Knight, the emerald green, entirely emerald green knight, who is veritably verdant. So yeah, another alliteration. completely green, hair green, beard green, horse is green. It's all green. So there's something mystical about this knight, who comes at 12 times and challenges the character of the court. In fact, no one seems to be answering his call. Everyone seems to be, afraid to answer his challenge because his wager is, it's a beheading game. You take a nick at me, and I get to take a nick at you, which, seems like, well, this shouldn't be too hard. I'll just cut your head off and then we'll be done with it. But of course, there's a catch, as we later on learn. So again, Christian, but still some pagan elements of magic in this. Like especially when we get to, with Morgan Le Fay and Merlin, it seems more kind of have some pagan roots. In fact, Arthur actually appears to step up and accept the challenge until Gawain's like, no, 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 boss, I got this. I'll step in, and of course Gawain steps in, deals the blow, and people are kicking the head with glee because they think they've, they think they've won. Of course, there's a pact made here, like, no, you need to come seek, like, you take off my head, you need to come seek me out and receive the blow yourself. So they make that deal, they make that wager. Um, and we actually see the humility, like on page 193 of Gawain, where he says, I am weakest of your, this is line 354, I am weakest of your warriors and feeblest of wit, loss of my life would be least lamented. And we learn that's not necessarily true, because like when he leaves to go seek out the Green Knight at the chapel, at the Green Chapel, the people will speak behind like, well, it'll be so hard to replace someone like him. But that's the nature of chivalry. That's the virtuous code of behavior, that you're humble and you have humility and things like that. You don't boast. Whereas, this knight seems kind of boastful. The Green Knight does. This mountain of a man, as it says. So yeah, the Green Knight, there's some kind of magic at work because he gets beheaded, picks up his own head, and then rides off. And again, similar to Beowulf, we have a challenge to the hero, like keep your word or be called a coward. And that's not the, reputation is very important in these heroic tales, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and like Beowulf. Beowulf seeks fame. That's what he's out to do. Achilles sought fame. He could die young and have fame, or he could live to an old age and be comfortable. He chose fame. That's the heroic narrative. So Carnival and Lent go by, seasons pass, and then it's time to go, Gawain. And Gawain goes, and he has with him a symbolic weapon. Faith and weaponry is combined, like with the Pentangle shield on page 199. You have the five-pointed star, which is all interconnected, which is, it represents a few things. The wounds of Christ, it mentions the five wounds of Christ, which would include the wrists, the head, the crown of thorns, the legs, and then the spear in the side. So that would be all, that would be all five. But also the five joys, the Annunciation, of the coming of Christ, the Nativity, the birth of Christ, the resurrection after death, his ascension to heaven, and his assumption of, his rule over mankind. So, like, this shield is a symbol of his Christian faith, and it's supposed to protect him. His faith is what will protect him. There's numerous, rather than invocations of the Lord, though, there's prayers to Mary throughout this poem. Like when he's alone in the wilderness, it says he's alone and unloved in the wilderness, fighting off all sorts of, serpents, wolves, widows, which are like satyrs. Wild men or satyrs, giants. So again, like all these mystical creatures, kind of like Beowulf. And he endures the winter, but he prays to Mary to give him refuge, and there is an answer. And that's where he goes to the great castle. So a few themes in here to be concerned with is his relationship with Bertilac. And of course, we don't learn Bertilac's name until the end. And his wife, we usually call Lady Bertilac. That's typically how, wives were recognized, was by the names of their husbands. So like Lord Bertilac and Lady Bertilac. She is pretty much his during this time. Women would have been considered kind of, as part of property. That's how the patriarchal society went. So let's see. And Gawain already, like on page 205, in these lines, has a great reputation precede him. The Lord speaks all men of let's see, the Lord speaks, he says, Watch now, will witness, this is 9:16. Watch now, will witness his graceful ways. Hear the faultless phrasing of flawless speech. If we listen, we will learn the merits of language, since we have in our hall a man of high honor. Ours is a graceful and giving God, to grant that we welcome Gawain as our guest as we sing of his birth, who was born to save us. And they expect to learn the language of love, which almost comes across as a somewhat homoerotic, especially within the context of the poem, where there's a lot of homoeroticism shared between Sir Gawain and his host, Lord Bertilac. Now, when I say homoeroticism, I don't mean homosexual. Homoeroticism is suggestive behavior that implies some kind of, kissing another man, a man kissing another man, for instance, has homoerotic implications, but there's nothing explicitly homosexual about it. So homosexual is where it's very explicit. This is implied. So like if they undressed each other and got in bed together, that would be homosexual. This is homoerotic. It's suggestive, especially since we can't be sure that he actually wants to kiss Bertilac because it's part of their wager that they share their winnings. Okay. And then there's, of course, Blickety Blick, Lady Bertilac. Sorry about that, but she is described as being beauteous and perfect form, perfect skin. She is awesome. She's happening, and she's hot. So, in fact, he's lucky because she will give him comfort while the Lord is away on the hunt. There is a parallel between the hunt and the kind of hunt that's going on at home with Lady Bertilac hunting out uh, Sir Gawain. Trying to the hunt of seduction is what's going on, which is the testing of his character. And she does not beat around. She's very skilled. In fact, a lot of people say that her skill means nothing because at the end, Lord Bertilac says it was all his work. But Lady Bertilac has a part to play, and she's very good at trying to seduce Gawain. I mean, Gawain resists because of his strength of character, but she's crafty. Similar to the ways sometimes that the devil is portrayed, she is very crafty and and somewhat persuasive. She takes the as far as putting pressure on Gawain, and he definitely feels the pressure, especially with his tirade against women at the end about the nature of women. She locks the door, comes when everyone else is either gone or asleep, and says, and she says things to him like, 212, for instance, line 237. You're free to have my all, to do with me what you will. I'll come just as you call, and swear to serve you well. So yeah, she's basically saying you can do whatever you want. We can do everything together, pretty much. We can do it all. Of course, and so there's a lot of flirtation. In fact, she tries to flatter his character. Lines 1268. By marriage, she declared, it's quite contrary. Were I the wealthiest woman in the world, with priceless pearls in the palm of my hand, to bargain with and buy the best of all men, then for all the signs you have shown me, sir, of kindness, courtesy, and exquisite looks, a picture of perfection now proved to be true, no person on this planet would be picked before you. And so, yeah, very flattering, like, you are awesome, Gawain, and I would do if I had all the wealth, I would pick you before it. And so all that comes, she ends up cradling him in her arms and kissing him, and that's the she keeps tempting him, and it's similar to the three temptations of Christ, where he can. I think that usually takes place in the desert. Like the devil, one of the temptations is that the devil offers him control of the world, and as long as he worships the devil, when he does his 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. And so Gawain is somewhat of a Christ figure here, that he has to resist these temptations. Basically, she gives him the green light to sleep with her. What if he had said, and I still wonder, like some of my students in the past have wondered, what if he had given in to the temptation? So would she basically just prostitute herself at the whims of her husband's test? It's a hard question to answer. Okay. So, of course, in the comeliest way, in almost a womanly way, on page 215, 1389, line 1389, he gives the kiss back to Bertilac, and Bertilac, of course, is like, "What? How did you get that kiss?" And of course, Gawain's like, "You know what? That's not part of our deal. So let's just keep to our deal. I'll give you my winnings, you give me yours." And of course, he gets the venison, and Bertilac gets the kisses because that's what he won. Um, and this comes into play later on when he finally meets the Green Knight. We know the Green Knight is Bertilac. Let's see. But some things to consider. One things I like about Lady Burlack is her craftiness. On page 217, lines. Let's start with the last stanza, lines 1508. "I would like to learn, and please find no offence, but how can it follow that a lord so lively and young in years, a champion in chivalry across the country, and in chivalry the chiefmost aspect to choose, as all knights acknowledge, is loyalty and love? For when tales of truthful knights are told in both title and text, the topic they describe is how lords have laid down their lives for love, endured for many days love's dreadful ordeal, then vented their feelings with avenging valor by bringing great bliss to a lady's bedroom." Green light, like I said. "And you, the most notable knight who is known, whose fame goes before him, yes, how can it follow that twice I have taken this seat at your side, yet you have not spoken the smallest syllable which belongs to love or anything like it? A knight so courteous and considerate in his service really ought to be eager to offer this pupil some lessons in love, and to lead by example. Why are you, whom all men honor, actually ignorant, or do you deem me too dull to hear of dalliances?" So she's using the code of chivalry to try to manipulate. She's manipulating the code of chivalry, trying to get him to break it, because of course she's married. Adultery is not part of the chivalric code, but she's kind of skipping over that. She's equivocating. She's leaving that out and saying that one of the main parts of chivalry is love. Why aren't you teaching me love, or teaching practicing your love with me? And of course, we know because she's married, she's off limits, and despite her offering herself to him, yeah, that will not end well for him. It will be a tainting of his character, which is what Gawain is obsessed with anyways. So as even the poet even mentions that there's no sin transpiring, another kiss, and again the kiss is paid back to the Lord. Eventually, this culminates with the third time where the token of the girdle is given, and it's described as having some kind of magical power of protecting the body. And this, if you know Christian precepts, one of the main precepts is in order to find your life, you must first lose it. I believe that appears in Luke, the book of Luke in the Bible. But he decides to try to save his own life by accepting the girdle, which he says cannot harm the body. The body cannot be slain if it wears the girdle. We know that's a kind of bullshit because he gets a nick on the neck and bleeds. So she spins this story about it having special powers. It doesn't. In fact, it traps him, and he gets mad at himself that he fell for it. Because he meets the Green Knight. Green Knight's there at the Green Chapel. He's given numerous times to turn back, and he's like, "No, I must keep my word. That's important. My word is my bond," kind of thing. In fact, the knight is even given kind of a harrowing reputation of being murderous, for instance. That's supposed to scare Gawain, but he goes through with it, meets the knight, and the knight misses twice. The first time, Gawain shrinks from the axe and is then mocked for cowardice, obviously. And being a man, he can't be called a coward, so he gets there, and the second time he's missed, but he doesn't move. Then the third time, he gets the nick on the neck, because though he didn't sleep, don't sleep with other men's wives, I think is the moral of the story. Otherwise, you might actually lose your head to the Green Knight. But he gets the nick on the neck because he did not share the girdle with Bertilac. He kept that for himself because he was selfish. He loved his own life, as line 2368 says. And of course, interestingly enough, on page 235, that leads to a misogynistic, anti-feminist rant. There was a lot of anti-feminist, in Christianity there is some kind of sense of anti-feminism. Eve being blamed for the fall of man, for instance, which is what Gawain um, you know, sees, or Bathsheba leading to David, entrapping David. So he goes on this from 2410 to 2446. He says men are all bewitched by women and led to fall. So even though it's probably his own fault in succumbing, but women just be tripping us men up is pretty much his message. Um, and it's revealed that the way the Green Knight was able to do this is kind of a filler at the end. Morgan Le Fay, the half sister of Arthur, tried to she wanted to kill Guinevere apparently with this spectacle of a beheaded body that's still animated and still alive. Um, but then Sir Gawain confesses his sins. Earlier, he confessed his sins to the priests, and there's kind of this idea of penance in place. Like to feel better about himself, he must undergo Catholic penance, and part of that is confessing that he was foolish for accepting the girl, and then he wears his sin as a badge. He wears a girdle, and then the other knights mirror that. They wear the girdle too, which kind of shows that they're all not without sin or failings. And that's supposed to be kind of a reminder. It's a kind of a Catholic guilt thing, like you are sinful and you do make mistakes. And that's kind of the message of the poem is itself. So it's important for its magical elements, and it's also important for its style and the revival of alliterative verse. So concludes that concludes the lecture on Sir Gawain the Green Knight. Let me know if you have any questions.